Join me today as I spend a few hours this afternoon getting our kitchen in order to prepare for the week ahead. Now, having our kitchen well stocked on staples going into the week is absolutely crucial for me when life is busy if I want to continue to eat the way that we like to eat, which is cooking from scratch, real whole foods. So each week I take a few hours, typically on a Sunday, to get us set up for the week ahead, restock our kitchen, and do a little bit of meal prep. Though it really isn't quite as rigid as meal prep sounds, it is very rare that I am actually prepping entire meals. Most of the time, it looks like prepping components so that we can utilize those components in a variety of ways. It's a little bit less rigid, a little bit more of a rhythm versus a set plan. Now, I have a variety of things that I am prepping today, and to start out, I'm going to be making some sourdough hot pockets. This is a recipe that I've shared in a previous video, and in that video, I did a version that I stuffed with beef and cheese and a little bit of veggies, and I've been wanting to try a breakfast variation, so I made some of these for my husband, and he's been really enjoying them. It's a great way to get protein in, and what's nice about them is they're portable and they reheat really well. I'm getting started on the dough for the Hot Pockets because this is going to have to sit aside to rise for a few hours. Now, all of these recipes, as always, will be in the description box down below, but it's a really simple dough. So just some warm water, active sourdough starter, but I've even just done this with sourdough discard, let it rise, and I found it to work just as well. A little bit of honey and some olive oil, of course a little bit of salt, and then the flour, and that just gets all mixed together, and I set that aside in an oiled bowl. And that's going to rise for about 4 to 6 hours. That's going to vary a little bit. It's starting to get quite a bit cooler here as we move through fall. So I find that it typically will take a little bit longer to get to where I want it. I don't typically prep this much sourdough in a week, but I had quite a bit of active starter ready to go. So I'm also making up a loaf of my sourdough sandwich bread. This sourdough bread recipe is super simple. Again, all of the same ingredients actually, just in a little bit different ratios for the sourdough hot pockets. This is super simple and it's really forgiving. It's a recipe that I find I can use either weight measurements or cup measurements with really similar results. Typically, just for the recipe to have the most consistent results, recipes will call for a weight measurement, but I do find that this consistently works with good old cup measurements. So I just stir all of that together to a shaggy dough, and that is just going to set aside in the bowl. And over the next couple hours, I'm going to do a few sets of stretch and folds. I have had this venison roast in the freezer that I've been wanting to deal with, but I just keep not getting to it. So I thought this week for meal prep, what I would do is get that thawed and roasted so that we can have it for sandwiches throughout the week. So I am keeping this really simple, just coating it in a good amount of freshly ground black pepper and some coarse salt, making sure that all of the sides get well coated in that. And it's just going to go into a 325-degree oven. Time is going to vary, of course, with how big or small the roast is, and I'm just aiming for 140 degrees. I am not super rigid when it comes to sourdough. I think that's just not really my personality. So for the stretch and folds, do a set of 4 about every 30 minutes. I kind of just do it when I remember. and get it to a point where the gluten feels well developed, you'll really see from the first set to a few sets in how much the texture of the dough changes. Chicken is always a meal prep staple for us. We raise our own meat birds here on our property, and oftentimes, if you've seen my videos before, you'll know that I will throw a whole frozen chicken into the Instant Pot, just add a little bit of water, and cook it in there really plain. And the great thing about that is it's pretty quick, and I find that the meat just falls right off the bones once it's done cooking, and I can turn around and put the bones right back into the Instant Pot and make up a batch of bone broth for the week ahead. Now, today I'm actually taking the time to roast a chicken, which I do for dinners more often, and that's the reason I'm actually doing this today. I'm getting dinner prepped a little bit early, and that way we can have some nice roasted chicken throughout the week as needed in meals. We'll eat tonight, and then we will shred all of this and have that to use in a multitude of ways. I keep the seasoning really simple. I like to rub it with a little bit of butter, season with salt and pepper, and I'm just adding in a quartered lemon, a couple onions, and some whole garlic cloves. For a roast chicken that turns out well every single time, I just roast at 350 for 20 minutes per pound, and then an additional 15 minutes on top of that. Oftentimes when I'm cooking a whole chicken like this, I'll throw in some other root veggies, typically some potatoes and carrots. Today I left the potatoes out, but I did add in some carrots, and any veggies you add in are just going to be the most flavorful because it cooks in all of the juices from the chicken. I'm prepping a large batch of rice for both dinner tonight and to have some leftovers that we can use throughout the week. And my very favorite way to cook rice, whether it be white rice or brown rice, is in bone broth. This adds so much flavor and a lot of nutrition. So I will just sub the water with bone broth, and I like to add in some salt, usually some dried or fresh herbs. I'm just doing a little bit of dried parsley today, and some butter as well. And I just cook that as normal, and it makes the most flavorful rice that you will ever have. Definitely something to play around with the bone broth and different fresh herbs. At this point, my bread had been rising for about 6 hours. It had about doubled in size, so I'm just getting that shaped and into my loaf pan and covering that. Now I'll set that aside for a couple more hours until it reaches the top of the loaf pan. At that point, it'll go into the oven to bake. And what I'll often do is put this into the fridge. If I don't have time to bake it that night, I'll set it in the fridge for 24 up to 72 hours. The longer you leave it, the longer fermented the dough will be, easier to digest. Now, I mentioned for those sourdough Hot Pockets, we are going to do a breakfast version this week. So I am getting some veggies chopped up. You could do whatever you want here. I'm just doing some red onion and some green pepper I've got left in the fridge from the garden. Getting that all finely chopped, and I'm just gonna let those saute for a few minutes while I get the eggs ready. Again, this is something that's super easy to play around with. So far, both versions of this recipe that I've tried have worked really, really well. So the beef mixture or the egg mixture, you could do whatever meat you want. I've wanted to try some of our chicken. After I've shredded it, mix it with some pesto and do the same thing. These are just really nice because they're portable, ready to go, and pretty well balanced. This past weekend was Canadian Thanksgiving. If you didn't know, it happens in October, not in November like American Thanksgiving. And I had a little bit of ham left over from our Thanksgiving dinner. And this is some of the ham from the pigs that we raised last year. It is so good. I have figured out the best way to cook a ham in the crock pot. So easy to throw together, and I think it's the best ham that I've had. So there was not very much left, only a little bit. It didn't last very long as far as leftovers went, but I did add the leftover bit that I had into this egg scramble for the Hot Pockets. The other great thing about these Hot Pockets is they freeze well, so typically some of these will go into the fridge and then the other portion will go into the freezer. If we have time, I'll pull those out of the freezer the night before and then just reheat in the toaster oven for a few minutes, and that seems to work pretty well. So I'm just portioning out that dough, and I just use my hands to kind of form discs and press them out. Sometimes I'll go in with a rolling pin, and then I'll just add that filling to it and then pinch the sides of the dough up, make sure it's all secure, and then I'll flip it over and shape it a little bit. And something that I found that's helpful with these is if you roll the edges a little bit thinner, just so you don't end up with a ton of dough at the bottom. It just makes it so the filling is a little bit more evenly dispersed. These are going to get an egg wash so they get nice and golden brown in the oven. So I'm just whisking an egg with a little bit of water, generously coating those, and then you can top these off with whatever you want. You can do some coarse salt, sesame seeds, dried minced garlic or onion is great. Today I'm doing a little bit of everything but the bagel seasoning. I'll have this recipe in the description box down below if you want to give them a try. Again, I think this is something that would be super versatile, and I can't wait to try even more combinations of these. I ended up overproofing this dough just a little bit on the second ferment, but the bread still turned out great. Most of the time for sandwiches, we end up doing sort of the same thing on repeat. Usually it is roasted chicken, maybe tuna or egg salad when we've got lots of eggs from the chicken. But I don't typically buy deli meat. It's really hard to find any that is good quality where we live. And so this is something that I want to do more often, roasting up some venison. Part of this went into the fridge, and then the rest I just put into the freezer so that we can thaw that another time we need it for our sandwiches. Now, I do a lot of pickling, and most of my pickling is canned, keep it in the canning room, but something that I like to do as a quick pickle are pickled onions. I haven't actually tried canning them before. I know there are recipes for it, but I think they tend to lose quite a bit more of their color that way from what I've heard. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I will typically, every few weeks or so, do up a batch of pickled onions, and these last really well in the fridge. I've never had them go bad, and I love to top all sorts of things with these. They're great on rice bowls, on sandwiches, breakfast tacos, pretty much everything. You can't go wrong with adding some of these. So it's super simple. The brine is just a mix of water and vinegar. I have done all sorts of vinegars. Usually it's apple cider vinegar. Sometimes I'll do white vinegar. Both work really well. I've even done white wine vinegar before and rice vinegar. Just depends what I have. And I get that heated with a little bit of salt and a little bit of some sort of sugar. So you can do cane sugar, honey, maple syrup, all of it works. And sometimes I'll add in some garlic or chili flakes, but today I just left it plain. That just gets poured over the top of the onions. You're gonna wanna leave that for at least half an hour. They are better the longer that they sit. I pretty rarely buy fresh fruit. Typically, I will buy frozen fruit. We'll use it in smoothies. I find it to be significantly less expensive as far as organic berries go, but I have been on a yogurt bowl kick lately, and typically when I make those, I will just put frozen berries on top, but I really just wanted some fresh. So I paid a ridiculous amount of money for some organic blueberries and strawberries, but it was definitely worth it. The chickens love those strawberry tops as a treat, and I find the best way to keep berries fresh in the fridge is just to add a piece of paper towel so it can absorb any moisture that's left on them. When we have more eggs coming in, I'm more on top of washing them daily because I kind of have to be, but this time of year I find that I usually have a little bit of a buildup for a few days, so getting all of that done so we have eggs ready to go as we need them in the fridge this week. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. I hope today's video gave you some ideas of how you can potentially meal prep a little bit differently to set you up for the week ahead without being stuck to a rigid routine.